My name's Clayton Mercer, and 6 months ago, I had everything a man could ask for. A wife I thought loved me, two kids who still looked up to me, and a steady job at the lumber mill that's been the heartbeat of Waycross, Kentucky for 40 years. Now I'm living in a 5x10 storage unit, eating cold beans out of a dented can, staring at a leather briefcase that just rewrote my entire life. $50,000 in cash, a folded map with coordinates to somewhere in Montana, and one note written in a shaky old hand that said, "This is just travel money." What I found when I got there made me realize my whole damn life had been scripted by a man I trusted most. You want to know how a man goes from family dinners and Sunday barbecues to sleeping on a cot surrounded by concrete walls? How he loses his wife to his boss, his kids to lies, his soul to a world that never stops kicking? Then pull up a chair, because this story doesn't end how you think. My wife, Marla, used to tell me I was too trusting. "Clay," she'd say, stirring her coffee like she was mixing poison, "you think everybody's got the same heart as you. One day, that's gonna bite you." Funny thing, she was right. I just didn't know she was the one with the teeth. Waylon Creed, my boss, owned Creed Timber and Supply, the biggest name for 100 miles. His daddy built the place from nothing, and Waylon inherited it along with the charm, the cufflinks, and a taste for other people's wives. I worked there 18 years, managed 40 men, kept that place alive while Waylon drank whiskey and played golf with men who'd never held a hammer in their life. My boy Luke, 14, had just made varsity. My little girl June, 11, could outsmart both of us without even trying. At least I thought she had two parents. Turns out she had one parent and one actress playing a role for money. But when you hit rock bottom, sometimes you find the things that were buried under it. Sometimes the truth waits for you in a place nobody would ever think to look. That briefcase, it came from my Uncle Roy Mercer, a man folks called crazy long before I was born. Vietnam vet, mountain hermit, wrote letters nobody read. He moved to Montana after my daddy died in that so-called mill accident back in '89. Everybody said Uncle Roy went off the deep end. Turns out he was the only man standing in the shallow end of a very dark pool. That night in the storage unit, February cold biting through the walls, I held that letter and that cash and realized something. Marla once texted me, "You'll die poor and alone." She was wrong about the poor part, and the alone part too once my kids learned the truth. But the dying part, she was right about that. The man I used to be trusting, loyal, hardworking, died in that storage unit holding $50,000 and a note that said, "Your daddy's death wasn't an accident." The coordinates Roy left pointed to a cabin deep in Montana, 1,000 miles from Waycross, 1,000 miles from my old life. The wife who betrayed me, the boss who destroyed me, and the truth that had been buried my whole life. I was 42, just a man with calloused hands, a broken heart, and a gas tank that never seemed to stay full. But that trip showed me something no job, no church sermon, no marriage ever did, that sometimes God tears your world apart so you can finally see what's underneath. My uncle had spent 40 years collecting proof letters, photographs, bank statements, evidence that my father didn't die on the job. He was silenced. And the man who made sure of it was Waylon Creed's father. Marla wasn't a coincidence either. She'd been placed in my path, part of a con started before I was even born. This ain't a revenge story. It's a truth story. It's about how sometimes the road to redemption starts in a cold storage unit and ends on a dirt trail in Montana. It's about $8 million I didn't know existed, and a lie that's stretched across generations. But mostly it's about how the worst day of your life can become the one that saves your soul. If you're brave enough to follow a dead man's map and stubborn enough to believe that justice can take 40 years to find you and still arrive right on time. Millbrook, Pennsylvania sits 40 miles northeast of Pittsburgh, the kind of town where everyone knows your business before you do. Population 12,000 on a good day, built around Creed Timber and Supply, like a body around the spine. The mill whistle blows at 7, noon, and 5. You could set your watch by it, and most folks did. I'd been hearing that whistle my whole life. First as a boy when my father worked the floor, then as a teenager sweeping sawdust for gas money, finally as a man running the entire operation. 18 years I gave that place. Started loading trucks at 24, made floor supervisor by 35. The sawdust never really comes out of your clothes, but I wore it like cologne. Honest work has its own smell. Molly used to love that about me. Back when love still meant something. You smell like fresh cut pine, she'd say, burying her face in my shirt after a long shift. That was back in high school when she was Marla Jennings, the golden haired cheer captain with eyes that could stop your heart mid beat. I was just Clayton Mercer, the quiet kid with oil under his nails and the Chevy that rattled like a toolbox. We got married right after graduation. Her parents thought she was throwing her life away, but Marla swore. She wanted simple, a little house, a steady man, a real life. Our reception was at the VFW hall. Uncle Roy gave a rambling toast about wolves wearing sheep's wool. Everyone laughed it off, said he was just reliving Vietnam again. I understand now he was trying to warn me. The house on Maple Street wasn't much, but it was ours. 3 bedrooms, 1 bath, and a kitchen frozen somewhere around 1982. The whole place was beige when we moved in, and Marla hated beige. So we painted. She chose yellow for the kitchen, said it would catch the morning light. She was right. Every sunrise, I'd drink coffee in that yellow glow, watching her pack lunches while the world outside still yawned awake. Luke came firstborn in the middle of a snowstorm, fighting his way into the world like he had something to prove. June followed 3 years later, quiet as dawn. I remember holding both of them, realizing I'd never be the same again. Luke got my stubborn streak and Marla's charm. June got her mother's eyes and my knack for fixing things. She'd sit cross-legged in the garage, handing me wrenches, asking why engines breathe smoke. The mill gave us good insurance, steady pay, and just enough left over for a 1-week summer trip to Ocean City. Same cottage every year. Luke built sand castles, June chased shells, Marla read paperbacks under an umbrella. Simple joys for simple people, or so I thought. Waylon Creed inherited the mill after his father passed 10 years ago. Old man Creed had been tough but fair. Waylon was neither. He showed up maybe twice a week, reeking of bourbon and expensive cologne, leaving me to run the place while he pocketed the credit. He had this way of looking at women that made my skin crawl. Should have paid attention when he started looking at Marla that way during company picnics. Uncle Roy lived 3 hours north in a cabin. He built himself a Vietnam vet who'd seen too much and trusted too little. Every Thanksgiving he'd show up with a tin of fudge and another warning. "They killed your daddy, Clay," he'd whisper after his third beer. Made it look like an accident, but I know better. Mom would hush him, switch the subject, but I see it now. He wasn't drunk. He was haunted, and everything he said was true. After Mom passed when I was 20, Uncle Roy got stranger, quieter, more alone. The last time I saw him alive was Thanksgiving a year ago. He looked thin, pale, like a man running out of time, pulled me aside on the porch after dinner, pressed a small brass key into my hand. "For when you need it most," he said. I asked what had opened. He just shook his head. "You'll know." The warning signs with Marla came slow, the way rot creeps into wood, quiet, patient, unstoppable. First it was new clothes that didn't fit our budget. Then complaints about the house being too small, the vacation too plain, my paycheck too modest. Waylon says there's room for advancement, she mentioned one night over dinner. "Maybe you should try harder to impress him." I thought she was looking out for me. Now I know she was setting the stage for something planned, long before she ever wore my class ring. That Thursday in March started like any other. The mill floor hummed, the saws screamed. Around noon, my foreman Pete noticed me sweating through my shirt. "Boss, you look like death warmed over," he said. "Go home before you keel over on the line." I rarely took sick days, but the world was spinning and my stomach felt like I'd swallowed a handful of nails. I climbed into my old Chevy, counting the minutes until I could crawl into bed. 12 minutes from the mill to home. I remember everyone. When I turned onto Maple Street, I saw it Waylon Creed's silver Mercedes parked bold as brass in my driveway. That S-Class cost more than I made in 2 years, gleaming beside Marla's Honda like a punchline. My first thought was, maybe something happened at work, some emergency that brought the boss himself to my door. I parked on the street, walked up the path, and reached for the knob. Locked. That was odd. We never locked doors in Millbrook during the day. As I fumbled for my keys, I heard Marla's laugh drifting down from upstairs. Not her polite laugh, not the one she used with neighbors, the soft, private one that used to belong to me. The smart move would have been to turn around and get a lawyer, I think, before I burned everything down, but smart went out the window. I climbed those stairs I'd walked 1,000 times past Luke's football photos, June's crayon drawings, our wedding picture frozen in happier years. The bedroom door was half open. Wayland sat on the edge of my bed, lacing his shoes. Marla stood beside him in a silk robe I'd never seen. They were talking about Paris, about some fancy restaurant near the Eiffel Tower, like they weren't tearing a family apart in the bed where my children were conceived. "Hello, Wayland," I said from the doorway. You should have seen his face. For once, Millbrook's golden boy didn't have a smooth line ready. He just grabbed his jacket, muttered something about discussing it at work tomorrow, and brushed past me like I was one of his employees. Marla didn't flinch. She sat at her vanity, the one I'd built with my own hands for our 10th anniversary, and started brushing her hair. Long, even strokes. Calm as Sunday morning. "How long?" I asked. "Does it matter?" she said, eyes on the mirror. "Our kids sleep in this house, Marla. My kids." She turned then, and her voice was colder than February. "Your kids? Luke doesn't want to end up like you, working yourself into the grave for nothing. June's too smart for this small-town life. They deserve better." "Better like him?" I asked. "Wayland's taking me to Europe next month," she said, straightening the silk around her waist. "He's buying me a condo downtown. He's showing me what life can be instead of this." She looked me over like I was something she'd outgrown. "Look at yourself, Clay. 42 years old, and you've peaked. Supervisor at a lumber mill. Is that the dream you had as a kid?" I swallowed hard. I dreamed of having a family, of raising good kids with the woman I loved. She laughed sharp and hollow. "The woman you loved never existed. I played my part, and I was good at it. But I'm done pretending this is enough." The next morning, I showed up to work like nothing happened. My crew was already running the floor when Wayland's assistant called me to the office. He was sitting behind his father's old walnut desk, the one old man Creed had carved himself. Didn't even look up when he said, "We're making some changes. Budget cuts. Your position's being eliminated. Effective immediately." "I've been here 18 years. And you've been adequately compensated for those years," he said, still typing. "Security will escort you out." "This is about Marla." That got his attention. He finally looked up, smirked that smug snake oil smile I'd seen too many times. "This is about efficiency, Clayton. Nothing personal. 2 weeks' pay if you sign, nothing if you don't." So I signed, because what else could I do? No job meant no lawyer. No lawyer meant no fight. As security walked me out past the men I'd led for almost 2 decades, I saw Pete watching, jaw tight. Everyone knew this wasn't about budget cuts. And in a town like Millbrook, everyone would know by dinner. The divorce papers came a week later, slid under my door like a death notice. Marla had hired the sharpest attorney in 3 counties, a man whose smile was all teeth and no warmth. Somehow she'd scraped together the kind of retainer that didn't make sense on our old budget. She wanted it all: the house, the kids, alimony and child support, from a man who no longer had a paycheck to his name. When the gavel fell in Judge Harrison's courtroom, my life as I knew it ended. Harrison, the same judge who'd smiled wide, shaking hands with Vance Cromwell at the Millbrook Founders Banquet, called me unstable, said my anger made me unfit to raise my own children. Marla's lawyer made a theater of it, waving photos of my split knuckles after I'd punched the garage wall the night the papers came. They called it violence. I called it heartbreak. The storage unit on Route 30 became my home. You don't plan to live in a place like that. It just happens slow. First you sleep in your truck until the cops tap the glass and tell you to move on. Then you stay with friends until their wives start whispering in kitchens. Eventually you find yourself handing over borrowed cash, $89 from a brother-in-law who won't return your calls, for a climate-controlled box with a steel door and no windows. Carl, the night guard, pretended not to notice when I stopped leaving. He'd tip his hat and look the other way. Inside, I built my little world. Cot along the wall, my daddy's old tool chest as a table, a lantern for light. I kept my clothes in plastic bins, showered at the Planet Fitness down the road, cooked dinner on a camping stove like I was still out fishing with Roy. You learn to live quiet, so quiet nobody knows you're there. On my 3rd week, I started sorting through the boxes Marla had dumped in there after the divorce. Things she didn't want but knew I couldn't throw away: photo albums, Dad's war medals, the kids' old drawings, Christmas ornaments from better years. Every box felt like a wound reopening. Then I saw a brown leather briefcase covered in dust, a luggage tag with my name written in Uncle Roy's shaky hand. Roy had been dead 8 months. My pulse kicked up. I tried every combination I could think of: birthdays, anniversaries, nothing worked. Finally, I jammed a screwdriver into the lock. The metal gave with a snap that echoed in that tiny room like thunder. Inside was money, stacks of $100 bills, neat as soldiers in formation, $50,000 in total. But the money wasn't the real shock. It was a letter on yellow legal paper written in Roy's familiar scrawl. Clayton, if you're reading this, it means you've hit rock bottom. Good. A man can't rebuild till the ground beneath him's clean. This ain't charity. It's a road fund. You'll find coordinates in Montana. Drive there, park by the red gate on Timberwolf Road, walk north a mile till you see a boulder shaped like a bear's head. Behind it's the truth about your father's death. Your daddy didn't die in no mill accident, Clayton. He was murdered by Cromwell Sr. Man killed him for refusing to sell his share of the mineral rights. Those rights are worth millions now, and they belong to you. I've spent 40 years gathering proof, building up wealth from my own cut. Cancer's got me now, and I won't see it through. That's your job. Everything you'll need is in the cabin: documents, recordings, photos, maybe even a few surprises about that wife of yours. Don't trust nobody. Dwight's been in Cromwell's pocket for years. Your father would be proud of you, even if you're sleeping in a storage unit tonight. Sometimes a man has to fall flat on his back before he can see the stars. Make them pay. Roy. I read it 6 times before I believed it. My father murdered? By Cromwell's father? Roy knew all along? The coordinates pointed somewhere near Glacier National Park, deep in the Montana wilderness where Roy had vanished after Vietnam. $50,000 sat in my lap. Enough to start over, rent a place, hire a lawyer, maybe fight for shared custody. But his words kept ringing in my head. Sometimes the lowest point is just where you need to be to see the stars. The next morning I bought a used F-150 for $8,000 cash, loaded it with a tent, food, and whatever hope I had left. I told no one where I was headed. Who was left to tell? My kids weren't allowed to talk to me. My friends had picked sides and I wasn't on the winning one. Before I left Millbrook, I drove past the old house on Maple Street. Tommy's bike was in the driveway, its back wheels spinning in the wind. Grace's bedroom window had new curtains. Purple, not the pink ones she'd picked out with me. Molly's car wasn't in the driveway, probably parked outside Vance Cromwell's shiny condo in downtown Pittsburgh. The house looked alive, like life had just kept rolling on without me. A man could vanish, and the world wouldn't even slow down to blink. The drive to Montana took 3 long days. I only stopped for gas and the occasional 2-hour nap at rest stops. Somewhere past Minneapolis, the road started to forget what pavement felt like. By the time I reached Flathead County, it had turned to gravel, then to something that barely counted as a road at all. Timberwolf Road was marked by a rusted sign, shot full of bullet holes, the kind of place GPS gives up and says you're on your own. The red gate Uncle Roy mentioned was mostly rust now, but the heavy padlock opened easy with the key he'd given me last Thanksgiving. I remembered him pressing it into my palm and muttering, "Keep this safe. Might need it someday." Beyond that gate, the dirt path narrowed until the truck couldn't go any farther. I parked, slung my pack over my shoulder, and started walking north, compass app in hand until the signal died. The forest swallowed me whole. Pines so thick they turned daylight into dusk. Every twig snap made my heart jump, certain a bear or wolf was watching. After what felt like forever, 1 mile by my count, I found it. A boulder in a clearing, shaped uncannily like a bear's head, its snout jutting toward the horizon, just like Roy had said. Behind it, hidden under brush, was a narrow trail. I followed it another 100 yards and stopped dead. There, in the middle of nowhere, stood a cabin that had no business being there. Solar panels glinted on the roof. A satellite dish pointed toward the sky. The hum of a generator carried on the cold air. This wasn't some survivalist shack, it was a fortress. The steel door opened with another of Roy's keys. Inside, it felt like stepping into someone's brain, neat, paranoid, and obsessive. The walls were lined with photographs, maps, documents, all connected by red string like something out of a detective movie. Filing cabinets filled one corner, each drawer labeled by year. A desk held 3 computer monitors and a tangle of recording gear that looked expensive as hell. And right there on the main wall, staring back at me, was my father. A young Daniel Mercer, smiling wide, shaking hands with old man Cromwell in front of the mill. The note beneath read, "Partnership Agreement, 1,976. Equal shares." Piece by piece, the story unfolded from those papers. My father hadn't just worked for Cromwell, he'd been his equal partner. He'd inherited mineral rights from my grandfather, land sitting on top of one of the richest natural gas deposits in the state. Cromwell wanted it all, but my dad refused to sell. He offered partnership instead. Then came the accident. Police reports from 1982. Daniel Mercer crushed by a faulty lumber loader. Case closed in a week. Equipment malfunction, the report said. But Roy had found more maintenance logs showing the machine had been serviced the day before. Insurance policies Cromwell took out on my father just months earlier. And a witness long dead now who'd overheard a heated argument about those mineral rights. My hands shook as I turned each page. Then I found the folder marked MD. Inside were photographs that made my blood run cold. Marla, 16 years old, standing beside Vance Cromwell, who would have been nearly 40 at the time. More pictures followed, all distant, all discreet. And then documents, a bank account in Marla's maiden name, opened when she was 17, regular deposits from a Cromwell Industries subsidiary, monthly like clockwork. I moved to the recordings next, dozens of audio files, neatly labeled by date. I clicked one from 3 years back. Roy's voice came first, gravelly and deliberate, following MD to meeting with VC at Riverside Motel. Then Marla's voice, my wife's voice. He's getting suspicious. How much longer do I have to keep playing housewife? Vance replied, his tone cold and measured. Until we can provoke him. We need something we can use in court. Discredit him completely. I clicked another from just last year. Marla, I've been married to him 16 years, Vance. I've had his kids. Sometimes I forget I'm pretending. Vance, those kids are your insurance policy. He won't fight back with them caught in the middle. Once he's broken, the rights revert to his next of kin. You'll have control until they're grown. I just sat there, numb, listening to the life I'd lived be dismantled word by word. Marla hadn't fallen out of love with me. She'd never loved me at all. She'd been placed in my life, groomed, molded, and weaponized by a man twice her age. A man who killed my father and spent decades waiting to finish the job through me. The mineral rights, my father's share, were now worth over $8 million. Roy had quietly collected his half all these years, living like a pauper while building a secret fortune. Every dollar traced, every document airtight. The truth hit me harder than any courtroom verdict ever could. My whole life, my marriage, my children, my ruin had been engineered, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel broken. Ifaltabok. According to the will I found in the desk drawer, every last cent was mine. All of it, the accounts, the land rights, even the cabin itself. But Uncle Roy hadn't just been hoarding cash. The man had been quietly building a war chest and a legal case that could bring Cromwell Industries to its knees. Folders marked evidence held decades of sins, environmental violations, off-the-books payments, tax evasion, and bribes to local officials. There were signed affidavits, whistleblower statements, photos, and bank records tying it all together. Even Judge Harrison, the same one who'd handed my kids to Marla, was on the take. It wasn't just corruption, it was rot. And Roy had documented every inch of it like a man digging his own grave just to make sure the truth got buried with him. The last file on his computer wasn't labeled, just a date the week before he died. When I clicked it, his face filled the screen. He looked hollowed out, eaten alive by the cancer he never talked about, but his eyes still burned like fire. Clayton, he said, voice rasping but steady. If you're watching this, you've lost everything. Which means they think they've won. That's good, they're not watching anymore. Now you can fight back. He coughed, winced, then kept going. The money's yours, legal and clean. But what you do with the rest, that's up to you. You can take it, disappear, start over, or you can finish what your daddy started. Either way, they lose. Then the screen went black. I sat there a long time, staring at my own reflection in the dark monitor. The choice Roy talked about wasn't really a choice. Running would have meant letting them win, letting my father's murder stay buried, letting my kids grow up thinking their old man was some washed-up loser who couldn't keep a job or a family. So I stayed. 3 more days in that cabin, memorizing every document, copying every file, burning every lie they'd ever told into my memory. Then I loaded the evidence into my truck and started the long drive back to Pennsylvania. Only this time, I wasn't running from something. I was driving toward it. My first stop was the FBI field office in Pittsburgh. Agent Patricia Nuller's looked at me the way folks look at someone who's about to waste their time. I could see it in her eyes, another conspiracy nut with a folder full of wild theories. Until I showed her the documents, then her expression changed. She called in two other agents, then her supervisor. That was the moment I knew Uncle Roy had done it right. The next 4 months were slow, careful, and quiet. Grand juries in secret. Forensic accountants tearing through 40 years of Cromwell Industries books. Federal agents interviewing everyone who'd ever signed a check or contract with Vance Cromwell. I rented a small apartment in the city, kept my head down. My lawyer said the less I was seen, the better. So I waited 4 months of watching the world turn without me while the wheels of justice started to creak into motion. Then, one Tuesday morning, it all came crashing down. News alerts lit up every screen in Pittsburgh. Local CEO arrested in federal corruption probe. Vance Cromwell taken from his country club in handcuffs. 3 city councilmen, Judge Harrison, even the police chief who'd buried my father's case all those years ago. The charges read like a grocery list: tax evasion, bribery, conspiracy, environmental crimes that take a generation to clean up. They couldn't touch the murder. Too many years had passed, too many witnesses gone, but his family's empire would crumble just the same. Marla's arrest came later that afternoon. They picked her up outside the elementary school while she was waiting for Grace. My phone rang that evening, a number I didn't recognize. But the second I answered, I knew that voice. "How could you do this to your children?" she screamed. Her words hit like gravel against glass. I didn't yell back. I just sat there in silence until she finally stopped to breathe. "You did this to yourself, Marla," I said quietly. "And you did it to them." Then I hung up. Melanie's voice cracked through the jail phone. "They'll see their mother arrested." "Their mother was never real," I said quietly. "You were a story written by a man who thought he owned us all." That was the moment she broke. The truth finally tore through her mask. She admitted it all: how Vance Cromwell had found her when she was 16, paid her to get close to me, to marry me, to have children with me. It was never love. It was a long con to bury my father's legacy and steal what he died protecting. The trial became a national circus. Small-town lumber dynasty exposed in 40-year conspiracy. Vance got 15 years in federal prison. Melanie, 5. The others folded, one by one: councilmen, judges, men I'd once called neighbors. But my real victory came quietly, in a small living room with 2 frightened kids. Tommy stood frozen by the door. Grace ran to me, sobbing. "Daddy, is Mommy really bad?" "Your mom made terrible choices," I said, kneeling. "But that doesn't mean she doesn't love you. People can do wrong things and still have good in them." It took time. Therapy, tears, nights when Tommy wouldn't speak to me, and mornings when Grace slipped her hand into mine at breakfast. But slowly, we found our rhythm, a real family, built on truth instead of lies. I used Floyd's inheritance to start Hendris and Sons Lumber, hiring back the good men Cromwell fired. Carl, the security guard who'd looked the other way when I lived in that storage unit, now runs my night shift. I still pay for that same unit $89 a month as a reminder of where I came from. Uncle Floyd once told me, "Sometimes you've got to lose everything to see what really matters." He was right. My father died for honesty. Floyd gave his life to prove it. And I just refuse to stay silent. I may not have much left from the life I once knew, but I've got something better now. Tommy's laugh, Grace's smile, and the peace that comes from knowing the truth finally won. Melanie said I'd die poor and alone. She was wrong on both counts, because the truth, even when it shatters your world, is still freedom.